Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Greg. We're
How are you
back.
today? We're back. I love when we're back.
I know. Okay, so it's June when we're
June.
recording this. It's
Yes,
June 2025.
correct.
And June
And
is
Pride Month.
woo!
Yes. So we are going to be talking about Pride Month
We are. We
today. And
are.
in fact, the entire episode today will be focused on parade logistics. Okay, just kidding.
Yes.
We're not going to talk about that. In case anybody who's reaching for the stop button, we're not going to talk about parades.
No.
What's relevant for us in Pride Month, Kristen?
Well, I mean, we're talking about leadership. So how can leaders help to support people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community,
Yes.
you know? And what do people that are a part of that community really need in
Yeah.
this time of year?
Yes.
So I know you have some ideas about this. And I also have a story about I am not personally a part of
Yeah.
that community. I'm an ally, but
Yes.
I have managed a lot of people who are
Yes.
part of that community. And so I have not always done it well. And so I have a story to share about that. And
Nice. Oh gosh,
I think it's okay to kind of grow into it.
it is. I think
So
so too. And because I
yeah.
have stories to share about that as well. So I am gay. I'm a gay man.
Hmm.
I've been out of the closet for 30 or 35 years, something like that.
Hmm.
And that's been an interesting process. And just the coming out process is interesting. But for me, I think the value of this conversation for leaders is that if I'm a leader, what I want the most is employees who are creative and innovative and
Hmm.
engaged and solving problems and all those things.
Hmm.
And I get that when my employees feel included and they feel seen and they feel like they don't have to defend themselves in the core of who they are in the workplace.
Yeah, psychologically safe.
That's it, psychologically safe.
Yeah.
It takes
Yeah.
time and effort to
Yes.
create that defense. So I think the thing today, there's a lot of different ways to talk about pride and talk about your LGBTQIA plus employees and team. But the one I think we focus on is like, how do you just make sure people have room to be their fully creative, awesome selves? And I think that's a valuable conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell me how you've done that in the past.
Well, so here's the thing. I learned a thing. So this was a maybe 20 years ago. So I've been out of the closet for 10 or 15 years, which means
Hmm.
I had the gist of it. I'd figured it out,
Okay.
which by the way is not true. You never fully figure it. And I found as a hiring manager, I hired somebody on my team, a man who was gay, who I knew that he was gay, but I didn't know him personally. And I had other members of my team as well. And I found that without even realizing it, I was holding that employee to a higher standard. If he said or did anything that looked stereotypically gay or it was in any way flamboyant, I was super judgy of him. And I
Oh.
think there's sort of an in-group thing where I want this group that I'm part of. I was out of the closet. I mean, I've
Hmm.
been publicly out since I came out. And I realized that I was holding a different standard. I think that's not uncommon
Hmm.
for us to hold people who are part of our own in group to a different standard. So that was a really interesting learning for me,
Hmm.
is that I was holding that man to a higher standard, and I was more critical of him, and I made his job tougher because of that. For a little while, I kind of wrapped my head around it and was able to come to terms with it. And it's why I jokingly said, I'd come out, I was really good at, I was pro gay at that point.
Hmm.
But there's always something new to learn about being a leader in that space. That was a big one for me. You know, I, he got to be as fallible as anyone else on the team, and I needed to manage my standards differently.
Yeah. I think women do that to each other too.
I've heard
Like
that. Yeah.
I think it's right
Yeah.
that, if you're in an in group, you tend to hold yourselves to a different standard. And I've definitely been guilty of that in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have too. But that was an interesting one for me to learn. How have you kind of grown into being a leader for?
Okay. So you and I had my first team of people that were queer.
That's right.
So,
Yep.
and I kind of inherited a sales team from you of people who were a part of that community, which is
Right.
great.
Yep.
Then I went on to hire people of my own from
Yes.
my team. And I at the time just had this glut of like frat boys like applying for jobs, and I hired a bunch of them. And the queer people and the frat boys clashed. And so, and it was notable, and it was creating a
Yeah.
cultural rift on our sales team that I wasn't happy about.
Yeah.
And so my but what had happened is also physical space is important, I think. And so in our office, the people who had been there the longest had their space, and then there was new space for the new people. So
Yeah.
all my new frat boys went into one room.
Right.
And so then we had basically a queer room and a frat boy room.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
not helpful. And so I I still remember this as one of my most meaningful learning experiences, both good and bad, as a leader.
Mhm.
I forced them to change space
Oh my God.
and to blend together. And
Yes.
I assigned them spots, and I mixed up those two groups,
Yeah.
which was terrible for about 2 weeks.
Yes.
And they all complained to me and privately, and they all
Yes.
complained loudly to one another, and they didn't like each other, and it was bad. And then about 2 weeks in, everyone was like, I kind of like this new seating situation. I was like,
Dang.
phew, because
Yes.
this was my first management job. I
Mm.
was like, that was kind of a risky
Yeah.
because what I've learned since then is that physical space is very emotional for people.
Yeah.
And like you get attached to your desk
Yeah.
and your office space. And I have learned that over the years. And
Yeah.
so that I didn't know. And so that was I learned a lot from that experience. I learned pros and cons from that experience, but it was my first opportunity to lead a group of people that were queer.
Yeah.
And I think one of my biggest learnings from that is that everyone just kind of needs to dive in a little bit,
Yes.
and if you're uncomfortable for a few weeks or,
Yeah.
a few minutes, it's
Yeah.
okay. You're going to
Yeah.
get over it. You'll learn something. And if you can just be open-minded and cool, you're
Yeah.
going to probably enjoy where you
Yeah.
land.
I love that.
So, like, that was a good learning. Since then, I've managed many people that
Yeah.
have been a part of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yeah.
And I think, different, I think the thing is, everybody's an individual
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yes.
Like you can kind of clump people into groups, but we're all just people, and we all
Yes.
have our own stuff. We all have our own personal lives outside of work. And I think what I've started to learn over time is that the best thing I can do as a leader and an ally is to manage the individual rather than managing by a group. And yet at the same time, make sure that those like different people in different times are going to have different needs. And Pride Month is a sensitive time,
It is.
and it's a celebratory time, and that's what it was intended to be, but it
Yeah.
has downsides to it, and I'll let you talk about that in a second. But I think extra support during those kind of possibly emotional times is also important, along with managing individuals. So
I completely agree. There's so much good in what you just said. I want to hit some of the key points because I think that they think they're important to elevate. So the first thing for anybody who's listening or watching, you've heard Kristen and I use the phrase LGBTQIA plus and queer somewhat interchangeably. And I want to
yes.
call that out because I think that's an important one. I think every one of the initials in LGBTQIA plus is important. All the
Yes.
individuals that are represented there are important to be represented. And also it's a mouthful. And so
Yes.
a lot of people, myself included, not everyone, myself included, have sort of reclaimed what has often been a really negative word, queer, to use as a catch-all. So sometimes I
Mhm.
refer to myself as queer, sometimes I refer to myself as gay. It's going to be very individual. But if you're hearing this and you're hearing Krista and I use queer interchangeably with LGBTQI plus, it's deliberate and it's because we recognize that as an overarching term. That was the first thing I'm going to say. The second thing, and it's great because you had, prior to us starting today, you had to remind me of that mix. I remember it now. I remember you making that choice. At the time, you
Yeah.
were closer to it than I was. So you were more aware of the need for
I
it.
was like, hey, Greg, I'm going to mess up all of the mood in the office for like a few weeks. Are you cool
Yes.
with that?
And knowing myself, even at the time, I'm sure I was like, whatever, sure. Good luck.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember at the time though what you're describing about the upset and then the way it leveled off, because you did exactly what you're describing, which is the first thing you did is you had control over the space that was within your job and your
Mhm.
scope. And in addition to being kind of the group of queer folks and the group of frat bro folks, there were also folks who'd been around longer and folks who were much newer, right? And that's also an important dynamic that you wanted to get in front of. So you mixed them against their wishes or against their will.
Against
uh,
their will.
Against their will, absolutely. And it worked out perfectly. And so, I
But
think
it wasn't perfect for
for a couple of weeks.
a week or two. Yeah,
And
it
again,
was.
you were
Yeah,
closer to that than I was, because you're
yeah,
right. They didn't come to me with those concerns. They were coming to you with those concerns. So,
yeah.
uh,
They were. I'm sure a few of them came to you, but many of them came to
yeah,
me and were like, "This is terrible. Please get the
terrible.
frat boys away from me." And and the frat boys likewise were like, "What are we? This is a. It was so fun, and now it's super boring." And I'm
Yeah,
like, "It's
yeah.
called business. Suck it up."
It's called
You
the
know.
job, yes. But the other thing you said that I want to kind of elevate because I think it's really important, and
Yeah.
I wrote about this. I posted this on LinkedIn a few days ago, sort of for Pride, is that there's this idea that the LGBTQIA plus community is a community, which is to say a unified community, and it's not.
Mm-mm.
Every single person who identifies and finds themselves in that in one of those initials is a different person, and they're age has as much to do with who they are, and part of the country and all of that has to do with who they are. And so you also kind of managed each of those individual folks concerns individually. You set a
Hmm.
group standard and a group expectation, and then you managed everyone differently because their needs were different and who they were different.
Yeah.
But that was all interesting. um, Before I even talk about like why Pride Month can be a sensitive month, if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently?
No.
Yeah,
I mean, I honestly, Greg, I've been
I
thinking
agree.
about this a lot lately because I've gotten to an age where one like reflects on one's work and one's life and stuff. It's very woo
Yeah,
woo, but I wouldn't change a thing.
I
I
love it.
wouldn't change a single thing I've done in my life, to be
Love
honest.
that.
Like I have done some stuff I'm not proud of. I have done some stuff that I think was probably wrong, but I
Mhm.
learned from it.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I'm very happy with where I am today. So
Hmm.
I wouldn't change a
Everyone,
thing.
write that down. I think that's a great reflection. And I agree. If I could go back in time and advise you in that moment, I wouldn't advise you to do anything differently, because yeah, it was
It
painful
needed
for
to happen.
it needed to happen. And sometimes as leaders,
Mhm.
that kind of unpopular decisive action is really necessary. Okay, but that's what we're talking about today.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Talk about pride because
okay,
pride is kind of, I think, so commercialized at
yeah,
this point. It's a little misunderstood.
yeah.
So
So
talk
there's a
about
couple things.
why that might be happy and sad for
Yeah.
people.
Well, so the first thing, like Pride commemorates, and some people know this, some people don't. Pride commemorates a resistance,
Hmm.
literally a riot in New York City, at a gay bar that was predominantly executed against police who were at the time. This was, oh God, the 60s, I think. It was very common for gay bars to be raided, right? So they would show up, and the big fear was they were going to publicize your name, right?
Mm.
So we're going to put your name in the paper. Literally, they put people's name in the paper, and you would lose your job, and you would lose your friends, and lose your family, right? So they would raid bars and arrest people and put their names in the papers. That was a common practice. And they showed up at the Stonewall Inn in New York, and a bunch of mostly drag queens,
Mhm.
which you know the overlap between drag queen and transgender is hard to nail down, because yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But drag queens and people of color, so transgender people and people of color, are who resisted. Box bricks and bottles were thrown, and they resisted, and they went to jail. But it was the beginning of the queer community kind of standing up and saying, we're not doing this anymore. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's an important thing to remember, because while it is celebratory and there's parades and festivals and things like that to celebrate, it commemorates when people decided that they'd had enough. So that's kind of the history of it, and it's interesting because as gayness, queerness has become more socially acceptable over the past few decades, you get corporate sponsors. Bud Light is the
Mhm.
sponsor of a pride parade, and Chase Bank and Alaska Airlines, those are all sponsors of pride in different cities, and it's great. But it ends up becoming very commercial, and sometimes it's
Mhm.
you don't really see through it. So that's the positive part of pride. A lot of queer people, myself included, lean into, a friend of mine calls them the high holy days, lean into pride celebrations as a way to really spend time with friends and to sort of revel in that, literally.
Mhm.
And also, weirdly, and I don't understand this except that it just is exactly what it is. Very often the fight is for rights, right? There was a long
Mhm.
fight for marriage rights that the queer community won, and there's been fight for other kinds of rights, protections in employment and things like that.
Mhm.
The successes or failures of those very often get announced in June. So when
Mhm.
the Supreme Court said that gay people can get married, that was announced in June of that year. And so
Mhm.
that ends up being a cause for celebration and also a cause for reflection. Like, how many years did we fight for
Mhm.
this? And then, so it is June of 2025. Just a few days ago, they announced that they're going to take Harvey Milk's name off of a Navy ship and replace it with somebody else's.
Yeah.
Harvey Milk was a San Francisco city on the board of supervisors in San Francisco, gay activist, and he was murdered in office. And so,
He was one of, if not the first public servant who was
yes,
openly gay
yep,
in the United States
exactly.
in the 70s, I think.
Yeah, it was the
Like
70s.
yeah, like 74 or 75. Like
Yep.
this, this was not that long ago.
It
And
was not
so,
a safe time. It was not that long ago, but it also, so much has changed since
yeah.
it wasn't a safe time, and he was in fact
Mhm.
murdered. So then, in
Mhm.
addition to celebrating the resistance, celebrating the strides that have been made, and celebrating inclusion, you can expect also people who you work with who are part of the queer community to be angry. So taking
Mhm.
Harvey Milk's name off of the ship is and announcing it in June is absolutely a slap in the face to
It
the
is.
LGBTQIA plus community. It is deliberate, and it's
Mhm.
hateful. That's how
Mhm.
I see it. And so you can expect the people you work with to have a lot of mixed feelings this time of year. You can
Mhm.
expect them to be a little more raw emotionally. You can expect them to seem a little more sensitive to things, to have less
Mhm.
capacity to make room for what might be a minor slight in January will feel like a much bigger slight in June. And
Yeah.
and so it ends up being a kind of a mixed bag. And again, because sometimes June is when these things get called out, um, people's emotions and responses and reactions are at a higher level. Mine certainly are. I've been doing this for a long time. I have a longer view
Mhm.
because I have had a longer view, and announcing the change to that Navy ship in June just a kick in the teeth. And it's hard not to see that as deliberate. Um,
Oh,
so
it's
those
very
are,
deliberate.
yeah, it is
It's
deliberate. Yeah, right.
absolutely deliberate.
Yes,
And
it is.
I'm like, I think this is the side that a lot of especially straight people just don't see
Right.
about this time of year. It's not rainbow merch time.
No.
It's it's like there was a lot of fighting and there's a lot of rights at stake and there's a lot
Yep.
of people who are very like this is their time to celebrate, but also this is the time to reflect on like
Yeah.
what their coming out had to be like
Yes.
or what their what's happening in the world and I think it is a very sensitive time.
It is. There's people who have lost family. For
Mhm.
people who loved them growing up, parents, siblings,
Mhm.
extended family. There's people with it when they come out lose those members of their family, and so as you say, there's going to be people who may be reflecting during this time of year about
Mhm.
when they had an extended family, biological family that they no longer have. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, mixed bag. Maybe their new family of choice is one that they take a lot of joy in, and at the same time are missing the connection with biological family. By the same token, there's going to be people who are even closer to their biological family that by coming out, by being genuinely who they show up better and more completely for their family. And so that's a point of joy. All of
Mhm.
this, as you say, is just, it's more. It's more joy and more pain. And it means that
Yeah.
a normal month, that June is not going to be a normal month. In the same way that the holiday, Christmas and New Year's can be difficult for some people for similar
Yeah.
reasons. It's just fewer people at work, so you don't always.
Okay, so let's talk practicalities because
Please,
I always like
yes,
that.
grounding.
Like what coaching would you offer to leaders who have people on their who maybe either are a part of the community or
Yeah,
are allies to the community and want to make sure that they're supporting their teams either way or
yeah.
supporting their teams effectively during this time of year?
I want to start with leaders who are not part of the community, and I would
Okay.
say the most important thing, and this is true all the time, but it's going to be true now. Just check in.
Hmm.
Recognize that if there's a person on your team who's an LGBTQIA plus person, queer person, their reaction to this time is going to be different. They may have zero reaction. They may not celebrate Pride. They may not be reflective. They may be like, oh, is that this month? But you don't know. It may be negative, it may be
Hmm.
positive. So there's questions like, hey, it's Pride Month. How is that for you? Is
Hmm.
that something that's important to you? You don't have to even ask about positive or negative, but just see the individual, ask the
Yeah.
individual, what is this month like for you, if anything? Um, and then those are great questions to ask of your non-queer team as well, right? So,
Hmm.
hey, Pride Month there's a really big focus on queer people right now. What do you think of that? So
Well,
check in with,
because people have family and
yeah,
friends,
right.
and most people, I think, at this point probably know somebody who is a part of the community
Yes.
or are related to somebody who is part of the community. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to out people, but I'm not too afraid to out this person because she's my kid and she's queer. And so, like, she would happily admit that if she was here. So I don't feel bad saying that. But yeah, my kid is lesbian.
Mhm.
Like, she has been out for a while, and so, like, you might be managing somebody like me who
Yes.
is straight but
Yeah.
has a gay child. You
Yes.
might be managing somebody whose parents are gay or
Yes, that's
who
real. Yep.
is who is a part of the allyship in some other way, who has had friends who have maybe passed
Yep.
in
Yeah.
some way related to this. So, like, I think it is checking in with not just the LGBTQIA plus
Yes.
people on your team, but everybody on your
Yes.
team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To your point, a parent who is reacting to
Mhm.
their kids coming out in whatever way, that's tough for a parent, right? My
Mhm.
mom and I had conversations early on in my coming out about what she thought my life was going to be and needing to
Mhm.
update that thinking. And so, yeah, checking in with those folks as well. And it doesn't need to be heavy, but just acknowledgement
No,
this is going on around us. How is that for
some
you?
people are going to be like,
Yeah,
"Yay, flags away,"
right. Yeah.
and other people are going to be like, "I'm kind of sad,"
Yes.
and so,
Yeah.
you just need to be thoughtful.
Perfect. Yeah, thoughtful, and as a leader, as it is at any time that you're checking in on somebody's sort of personal life, you don't have to
Yeah.
solve anything. You don't have to, like, someone
No.
says, I got a kid who's coming out and I'm really challenged by that. Gosh, I hope that goes okay. All you're
Yeah.
doing is checking in. So that's what I would say to sort of non-queer leaders. To queer
Mhm.
leaders, I would say first and foremost, take care of yourself, right? Put your own mask
Yeah.
or helping someone else. If this is a tough time for you, make sure you've got friends or family or someone around you that you can say, man, that whole changing of the Navy ship has got me really angry or sad or whatever. So take care of yourself first. Make sure that you are supported in during Pride Month. And
Mhm.
then same thing. Your experience of Pride is not going to be the same experience as a queer person who's on your team or as the straight people on your team. So as you would with anything else, just check in. What is this month like for you? Um, how are you doing with that? And again, you and I have talked about this, and this is one of the things I love about us on this podcast. Do it because you're a nice person, sure. Whatever. Be a nice,
Yeah.
but do it more because you want productivity out of these folks. You want
Yes.
them to show up and be present and be creative and innovative and solve problems. And they will do that if they're not worried about all this other stuff that we're talking about. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is a nice thing to do and the right thing to do if you're a good human, but whatever. It's
But
all
also psychological safety makes people more comfortable at work so
engaged.
they can
Yeah,
work.
that's it.
Like, I mean, not to be like too Machiavellian about it, but like we all go to work to make money and work.
Yes,
So,
that's
you
it.
know,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, if you want to start a nonprofit, start a nonprofit. If that pays your bills, great,
yeah,
good for you. But for a lot of the rest of us, it is making money for people who already have a lot of it. And we do
yeah,
that by engaging in corporate settings and leading people and being led by people.
yep,
And what a lot of what you and I talk about, and I think our reason for talking about pride today is to make all of that smoother.
yeah,
Yeah, that's our advice for pride.
cool.
Yeah.
Good Pride episode,
It
man.
was a good pride episode. I love it.
Woohoo, high five.
We'll have to have like rainbows in the
This is like a
background.
nod to the frat boys.
Yes. Oh, I miss the frat boys. I do. They were fun and
They were fun. Yeah.
they were young, but we're
We
all
were
young,
all young. We were
Evan.
all young back then, Greg.
We were. There's a whole other episode. I love hearing about the being reminded of you making that office space change. There's a whole other episode that I think we could do of like mistakes we made as leaders during that time, because good heavens,
Oh man,
I
I was
made
so
one.
bossy. It was bad. It was bad. I'm embarrassed by many things. So, yeah, we could do an episode about that. We have lots of other stuff to
But we really
we're
do.
never
Yeah.
going to run out of topics, Greg.
Okay, but we are out of time for today.
We are out
So,
of time. Okay, so bye everybody and
bye,
happy Pride.
everyone. Happy Pride to everyone, and happy Pride to you.
Yeah.
All right.